Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to be talking about Beidou. Beidou is an insane unit, just a good 4-star overall, but especially in the current Abyss 12, and I'm going to be talking about this throughout the whole video, but basically, in the current Abyss 12, she is one of the best 4-stars, if not the best, and she out DPSs a lot of carries, including some of the good 5-star ones. Like my Beidou team clears faster than my Diluc team because of how good she is in the current Abyss. If you guys don't know, her ult bounces between targets, and when there are exactly 2 enemies, like there are in 12.1, in 12.3, and I'll go more in detail throughout the video, I don't want to repeat myself, but basically when there are exactly 2 targets, Beidou shines exceptionally well. So because of that, she's a very strong unit, very strong carry, main DPS, and also support sub DPS, and so I'm going to talk about the best everything on her and go as in detailed as possible without making this video too long. We're going to talk about weapons, artifacts, sets and stats, talents, party comps, everything. Very quickly before I start, I want to say thanks so much for 100k subs. It's been insane, and there's going to be an announcement soon, so I don't want to take too much time right now. Also, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights, and I will be streaming tonight on Twitch. Link in the description if you're interested. Also, for some useful resources, spreadsheets and stuff, be sure to check out the description because I did use some research for this video. All the credit to them. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and get to basically understand the power of Beidou because she's really good and super underrated, especially in the current Abyss. So as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be covering main DPS and sub DPS or like burst support Beidou builds and how to play her. So before we get into the builds, artifacts, weapons, just everything, we're going to start by talking about her talents, her skills, how to use her, and some bonus tips that are very important. So let's start with her abilities. First of all, well, actually her normal attacks, I just want to say aren't that great. Even as a main DPS Beidou, you can level it, but you still will do more damage with like your ultimate and stuff. So this is what we're going to be talking about especially. First of all, there's your Tide Collar, which is your elemental skill. This is Beidou's counter. And as you guys know, it has a very high scaling. It does a lot of damage, base damage plus the damage bonus on hit. So it's just a lot of damage in one swing. And basically you can either press or hold it. When you press, it'll swing and do damage. And with your passive, which we're going to talk about soon, you can get like basically hold damage with press. But anyways, we'll get into that in a second. But basically when you hold it, what it does is it'll give you a shield and let you counter. When you get hit, when you hold your E, you can basically just do a ton of damage, effectively countering the damage. You don't take any and they take a bunch. And something important I want to add that I almost forgot to mention is that basically you attain max damage, like basically a perfect counter, by either tapping it as you're getting hit, right, in that tight window, or by holding it and getting hit twice. So as you guys can see, it says that the max stacks, the max damage bonus, will be attained once the effect is triggered twice. So be sure, if you are holding it, if you get hit once, you'll get damage bonus, but if you get hit twice, you get the max damage bonus. However, you can get that full damage with her press, as I mentioned, with her retribution talent. What this does is basically, if you tap your E as soon as you're getting hit, which is like a perfect counter, you can do the full amount of damage once you have this passive unlocked. Now, according to ZANTO's frame counting, who is a Beidou expert, I'm going to link him in the description because he deserves credit for all the research he's done. But basically, you have about 1/3 of a second to do this counter if you tap it. So it's not super easy, but it's also not that hard. You can get used to it when you learn enemy attack patterns, especially stuff like in the current Abyss, like Geo Vishaps attack constantly. So I've noticed that, yes, sometimes I'll miss my counter if I'm not thinking, but it is a lot easier to counter like a Geo Vishap than it is just a bunch of random smaller enemies. So basically, as you guys know, there's 2 types of counters. You can tap it and just deal a bit of damage. Well, I actually perfect countered there, so let me re-record that. So basically, if you just tap it and nothing hits you, it'll just do a small amount of damage, right? There it did 3k, and that's not particularly amazing. However, if you do hold it and something hits you, or you tap it and something hits you as you tap it, you'll do a lot more damage. So typically, if you hold it and something hits you, you see the damage I did there was huge. It was like 27k. So when you get hit and you're countering, you obviously do a lot more damage. Now, something you can do is known as a perfect counter. If I press E as soon as something hits me, I'll do a lot more damage than if I wouldn't have gotten hit. You see I did that 29k there, which is the perfect counter damage, which would have been the same as if I held it, but I got it by just tapping as soon as I was going to get hit. Now, the timing is pretty tight, as I said, but it's definitely doable, and it's something that you should learn if you plan on playing Beidou. Now, your second talent, which you unlock after ascending past 60, so 60 out of 70, will help a main DPS Beidou by giving you more damage from your normal attacks and attack speed and stuff right after you do a perfect counter, a counter for the maximum amount of damage. Lastly, let's talk about her elemental burst. This is her best ability by far, and it's why I think Beidou is so good, especially in the current Abyss. What this ability does is it just does a ton of damage with your normal attacks on any character. It doesn't have to be Beidou. It basically creates a lightning discharge that jumps between opponents. Now, when there's only one target, this can be kind of underwhelming, but when there are two or more, it's really good, and when there are exactly two enemies, it is insane. This is why she's so good in the Current Abyss, because in 12.1 and 12.3, which are the two hard ones, there are only two enemies, right? Two Geovishaps, two Ruin Guards, two Ruin Graders, and because of that, your burst will constantly bounce between the enemies and do a ton of damage, especially at C2, allowing you to deal a ton of damage with every single hit. And so talent priority wise, this is definitely what you want to max no matter what. If you are running her as a main DPS, I would go Q then E then normal attack. And if you're running her as a support, I would go Q then E and then just not level the normal attack. Now we're going to talk about Beidou's Constellations. The first thing I want to say is that she's very good even at C0. She's a strong unit, especially in the Current Abyss 12. I'm sure I'm going to say this across this video many times, but Beidou is a good character in general, but in the Current Abyss 12, she's like absolutely busted. So I highly recommend her, even if you don't have Constellations, but there are some that are very important, like C2, which we're going to talk about in a second. So first of all, her Constellation 1 is okay. It gives you a nice shield that absorbs electro damage very well. So it can be nice against electro enemies, like the Geovishaps if they infuse themselves with electro and stuff like that. C1 can be nice, but it isn't her best. Her C2, however, is insane. It's literally her best constellation. It is very strong. This basically just spikes your damage by a huge amount. It lets your burst, which is your main source of damage, bounce 2 additional targets, which is just a ton more damage. C3 and 5 are usually underrated. They're simple. They just give you more damage, especially 5 because it upgrades your burst. So both of these are good, especially C5, and they're very simple, just more damage, more talent levels. Her Constellation 4 is kind of whatever in my opinion, because her main damage doesn't really come from her normal attacks, but if you are running her as a main DPS, this is just a nice boost in damage. C6 is an amazing constellation. I would say it's probably her second best right after C2, because it is very strong. It decreases electro resistance of enemies, which is very nice, especially if you're not running Verdescent or Zhongli Shield. Just overall, electro resistance shred is very good and will greatly increase your damage. So yeah, to summarize, Beidou good at C0, but a lot better at C2, and her C6 is also insane. Now I want to talk about Beidou's build, and I want to talk about everything. She's a pretty complex character that can be played in different ways, and I want to cover everything in this video, support, like sub DPS, and also main DPS. The first thing I want to specify is basically the electro damage versus physical damage Beidou, and overall, regardless how you play her, electro damage always seems to be the best. And because of that, I've seen builds of like 2 Bloodstained with 2 Thunder Fury, with like physical goblet or attack goblet and stuff, and those can work, but overall, just for the best damage, you do want to be building your Beidou electro. So focus on electro damage because that actually does deal more damage. Even if you are normal attacking with her as a main DPS, building her electro will still give you more damage. So that being said, we're going to talk about her artifact sets. And there are a lot of good options for this. So a lot of the times what you're going to do is you're going to prioritize your good substats and pick from the few good sets, you're going to pick the ones that you have the best stats on. That being said, here are the good sets on her. There's the 2-piece Thundering Fury, 2-piece Noblesse Oblige, and 2-piece Glad, which are my favorites. 4-piece Thunder Soother can be very strong if you can keep enemies affected by Electro, and in some niche situations, 4th TF can work too. However, I recommend 2 Thundering Fury with either 2 Glad or 2 Noblesse, or you can also use like 2 Glad, 2 Noblesse, and basically combinations of these 3 2-pieces. Now for the detailed information, spreadsheets and all that, I'm going to link ZANTO's Beidou guide, which is on the Kaching Main's website, and he, as I mentioned earlier, he is a Beidou theory crafter. He has done a lot of research, and I don't want to take credit for it, so I will link it. But just overall, what I want to say is, personally, I've always ran 2 Thunder Fury with 2 Noblesse because I run a Wolf's Gravestone, and I have Constellation, so basically my burst will be doing a ton of damage, so having Noblesse and having Thunder Fury is really good. That being said, 2 Glad is also nice, and I believe that 4 Thunder Soother can be her best set if you are running a comp that can keep enemies Electro afflicted. So in comps with like, let's say Electro Charge that you can spam, basically the way it works, especially if you have like official support, constantly applying Electro, you can get the damage bonus from 4 Thunder Soother, and this can be a very strong set. But once again, it depends on your team comps. 4 Thunder Fury can be viable to reduce elemental skill cooldown if you want to in some niche comps, but I personally don't use it, and I do tend to prefer the other sets. So yeah, overall those are the good sets. 2 Thunder Fury, 2 Noblesse, 2 Glad are all good, and 4 Thunder Soother. I do quickly want to mention before I move on that if you are running a physical carry Beidou, 2 Bloodstained with 2 Thunder Fury or another 2-piece, if you have amazing substats on your Bloodstained, can work, but it is less damage than an Electro Beidou, so I don't recommend it. Now let's talk about the stats you want. So obviously Flower and Feather, you can't control them, but you would want to max substats, and good substats on her are obviously crit, rate, and damage. Attack percent is also a very nice substat, and energy recharge is also very nice because of how hard it is to get her burst. Now keep in mind when you're running her with a battery like Fischl and maybe an ER weapon or something, you can sort of skip some energy recharge, but in general it is a good substat to get. Once again, depending on how you play her. A main carry Beidou won't need as much because she's on the field picking up the particles, whereas a sub DPS, a support Beidou will need more energy recharge because she's not going to be actively on the field, not actively picking up the particles. I know people always ask me for a good amount of energy recharge they need, and honestly it really depends on your comps and your playstyles, so I would say test it out and see how much you need. For the other 3 artifacts, let's start with the easy ones. For your circlet, you definitely want crit damage or crit rate, regardless on how you're playing her, and try to go for a 1-to-2 ratio, which is 2 crit damage for every 1 crit rate, as is the case for most characters. For your goblet, electro damage is really good, and usually just the best. Attack percent can be nice too if you have really good substats and are doing mixed damage, but overall, electro damage is just the best. Lastly, for your sands, it really depends. If you're running her as a main carry or a sub DPS as a support, I like to call them burst supports. So if you're running her as a DPS or a burst support, it will change. And also it depends on your weapon. So let's start by talking about Beidou support. For a support build, you usually want an energy recharge sands. However, if your weapon has a lot of energy recharge, think of something like a Sacrificial Greatsword or Skyward Pride, you probably want to prioritize attack percent on the sands. Because attack percent will give you a lot more damage, it's just sometimes you can't afford to have attack percent on the sands because you don't have enough particle generation. For example, I run energy recharge on my sands because I run my Beidou with a Wolf's Gravestone, which gives me a ton of attack, but no energy recharge. For a DPS Beidou, I almost always recommend an attack percent sands, because usually when you run her as your main DPS, you're going to have the Fischl as a battery, and you're constantly going to be picking up the particles on Beidou. The main reason I like running Beidou as a DPS in Abyss 12 is because she's always on the field, so she's always picking up the particles, getting more energy, and constantly using her burst, destroying everything. So because of that, as a main DPS, I would recommend attack percent sands, and as a support, it depends. You can run ER percent if you need it, but if your weapon has it, or if you have enough, you can go attack percent for more damage. Now we have to talk about Beidou's weapons. Now there are a lot of good options for her, and it really depends on whether or not you're running her DPS or sub DPS or support. And we are going to be talking about both of those options. Now overall, as a main DPS, your best weapon is the Wolf's Gravestone because it's an insane weapon, a ton of attack. It's like a stat stick for attack, but it also buffs your whole party. So it'll buff your Fischl, your Xingqiu, whoever else you're running with her. And it's just a really strong sword, and I just love it in general. However, not everyone has a 5-star Claymore. I understand that. So the best free-to-play weapon would be the prototype Archaic, the one you can craft at the blacksmith. That being said, there are better 4-star weapons than that you can get from Gacha if you're lucky, or even the Battle Pass. The first one I'll talk about is Lithic Blade. This is a really good weapon on her, the best Gacha one for main DPS. However, I would say her best 4-star overall is the Battle Pass one, the Serpent Spine, because this is just an insane weapon, especially for a main DPS, a carry build of Beidou. What this does is it'll give you a bunch of crit rate, which is really nice, and give you a ton more damage with the effect. When you stack it up. Also keep in mind the other 5-star claymores like Unforged and Skyward Pride can be good for DPS as well. Now for support Beidou, I think the best weapon overall is the Skyward Blade. If you guys don't know what it does, basically it has a very high base attack and gives you a ton of energy recharge. So I really like Skyward Pride on her, but I also really like Wolf's Gravestone even on a support Beidou. Now yes, you're gonna have to run an energy recharge sands and more substats or whatever, to make sure you have enough particle generation if you're support, if you're not always on the field and picking up the particles. But Wolf's Gravestone gives you so much attack, and if your enemies are low HP, even if you're a support, you can do like 1 auto attack just to proc the Wolfish Tracker effect, increase all your party members' attack by 40%, including yourself, and just letting you deal so much more damage. But in terms of weapons that aren't 5 stars, for a support Beidou, there are many good ones. The Sacrificial Greatsword is very nice because it gives you a very high base attack while still having a energy recharge substat and effect that lets you reset your skill cooldown, which is huge because Beidou's counter does a lot of damage and generates a lot of particles, so you can use it twice and get more particles from it. Now something else I want to mention is that Lithic Blade and Serpent Spine are also very good for support Beidou and will give you a lot more damage. They will out DPS something like Sacrificial Greatsword, but Sac Greatsword does let you have more ER. It does basically give you more ER and give you a nice effect. And once again, your best free-to-play weapon would be the prototype Archaic from the blacksmith. On top of that, I didn't mention the Blackcliff Slasher, which is available in the shop right now, and it is a very good weapon. It is worse DPS than something like a Serpent Spine, but it is still good because of the high crit damage stat, so you can get it if you don't have better options, because it is pretty good. Now we need to talk about Beidou's party comps, and this is really important, so I'm going to try to be as clear as possible. First of all, I want to say running Fischl with Beidou is basically a must. Fischl is by far her best support and solves all of Beidou's weaknesses. The biggest thing is that Beidou needs a lot of energy, right? Her burst is the biggest part of her damage. Her burst is really strong, especially in the current abyss. And in order to maximize her burst uptime, because it does cost 80 energy, you do need to run her with Fischl in order to solve her energy problems. So running Fischl, definitely insane with Beidou. For many reasons. Obviously, the biggest one is that Fischl is basically just a battery for electro particles, constantly making electro particles, which Beidou can pick up and get a lot of energy from. On top of that, you get the elemental resonance, which can be pretty nice. And on top of that, Fischl gives you a ton of single target damage with her Ascension passive and her Constellations if you do have them. But even at C0, obviously, Fischl is still the best support for Beidou. So I would always recommend running Beidou and Fischl, and I'm actually going to show you guys a quick demonstration. So as you guys can see, I just used my burst on Beidou. I'm going to swap to Fischl and press E, and then just kind of chill on Beidou. And you guys will see Oz is generating a ton of these electro particles, right? Look at how many he's generating. And all of those are going to Beidou, letting me charge my ultimate super fast, especially when I pair it with my parry. It makes it a lot easier to get my burst because of Fischl. Without it, charging your burst on Beidou takes very long, unless you have a ton of energy recharge. And even then, it's usually not enough, so I can't stress enough how important running Fischl with Beidou is. Another really good character that I want to talk about is Xingqiu. Now, I did a lot of 4-star clears of Abyss 12 with Beidou, Fischl, Xingqiu, and the last character depends. A lot of the times I'll use Bennett because he's a healer and gives you a bunch of damage, although Beidou with her Constellation 1 and Xingqiu do give you a lot of damage reduction, so you don't necessarily need a healer. But anyways, Xingqiu is just a really good support in this comp, or with Beidou at least. First of all, he's an insane support, one of the best 4-star characters in the game for sure. Gives you a ton of damage with your rain swords, but on top of that, it gives you a lot of single target burst, which Beidou lacks, and it lets you constantly proc Electro charged because you're constantly applying Hydro with Beidou or Fischl's Electro. And while Electro Charge doesn't particularly do a lot of damage, it can still be really nice and it can stagger like Rune Guards and stuff, and it's just pretty good. It's bonus damage. Now, another character I highly recommend with Beidou is basically some form of resistance tread. So if you do have Zhongli, now he is a 5-star, not everyone has him, but if you do, he can be very good for reducing enemies' resistance to both Electro and Hydro, making him very strong. Another good character can be literally any Anemo character, so you can run Sucrose, Venti, Jean, or even the main character if you want to, on the 4 Verdescent set to reduce enemy resistances. On top of that, if you put Thrilling Tales on Sucrose, she can also buff your attack of your Beidou. You use that at the start of your burst, and your burst will deal more damage. Now, the comp that I'm showing you basically runs 3 burst supports that all do a ton of damage without needing a main DPS. Now, Beidou will probably be your main DPS here, but the main reason you are running her as main DPS is so that she can catch all the particles, whereas her damage from her normal attacks aren't that huge. It's just really everyone's burst working together. Now, Beidou as a burst support is also very good with a bunch of different DPSs, so this is just an example comp for like a main DPS, I'd say, but even when you're running Beidou as a support, as a sub DPS, you do still need her with Fischl. Now, a good comp would be something like this, where you're running Child main DPS with Beidou Fischl, Child being a really strong carry with Beidou Fischl. It honestly is such a good comp, because basically while Child is attacking super fast, Beidou's burst is going to be shredding everything, as well as Fischl's Oz doing a ton of damage and giving particles to your whole team. So overall, Beidou is one of the best 4-stars in the current Abyss. She is absolutely insane for Abyss 12. Like, trust me guys, if you're struggling with Abyss 12 and you invest into Beidou, you won't regret it, whether you use her as a support or a main DPS. Overall, I want to say that I really like her. She's fun to play and really strong if you can run her with Fischl, especially against exactly 2 targets. I hope this video was helpful. I really did a lot of research. Big shout out to ZANTO for theory crafting and Zajef, my math guy, for helping me out with this video. And I want you guys to know that 80% of my viewers aren't subscribed, so it means a lot. If you do want to subscribe, feel free. And thanks so much for the support, guys. Hitting 100k subs has been actually insane. So yeah, announcement soon. I'll probably announce something on my Twitch. That being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you want to. If you don't, that's okay too. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.